From the wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, this is Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier with your host, Robin Bearfield. In a land full of peril and vicious animals, humans are the most dangerous predators of all.
When doing a podcast about murder and mystery in Alaska, it's difficult to avoid the subject of the Alaska Triangle. First named in 1972, the Alaska Triangle stretches from Anchorage in south-central Alaska to Juneau in the southeast panhandle to Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, on Alaska's northern coast. Since 1988, more than 16,000 people have vanished from this area. And every year, approximately 4 people go missing per every 1,000 Alaska residents. This rate is twice the national average. Welcome to Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier. I'm your host, Robin Bearfield, and I'm broadcasting from the heart of the Kodiak National Wildlife Refuge on Kodiak Island in Alaska. I was surprised when I first learned how many people disappear in Alaska. But I don't need an underground pyramid or mysterious magnetic vortices to explain the statistics. I also don't understand the need for a triangle, since people disappear throughout the state, not just in the area outlined by a geometric figure's hypothetical lines. I guess a triangle conjures up the aura of the Bermuda Triangle, though, and suggests the possibility of mysterious forces at play. Honestly, I've always found the idea of an ominous Alaska Triangle laughable. Still, this year I've received a flurry of questions about the Alaska Triangle, including queries from the producers of 2 television shows wanting to know more about the mystical phenomenon. The popular U.S. show The Blacklist featured an episode on the Alaska Triangle, and I think it sparked a good deal of interest in the subject. Many of the mysteries I've profiled on this podcast have taken place in the vast section of the state defined by the outline of the triangle. Most of the state's population resides in this area, though, so it's not surprising more people vanish there. Many disappearances and other mysteries in Alaska have never been solved. Planes vanish, boats disappear, UFO sightings baffle military officers, and in one instance, the population of an entire village fled their homes to escape a giant, hairy, man-like creature. Let me tell you a few stories, then I'll explore the validity of the Alaska Triangle. My friend and fellow podcaster Marianne Paul, who has the popular podcast Real Ghost Chatter, is better than I am at explaining the realm of the mystical. So I've invited her to help me describe one of the theories about the Alaska Triangle. Then, if you want to hear more stories about mysterious disappearances in Alaska, she has asked me to be a guest on her podcast, where I have one more incredible story of mystery for you. The mysterious disappearance of the plane-carrying House Majority Leader Hale Boggs and Alaska Representative Nick Begich is a story I covered in detail in an earlier episode. This disappearance trails along the southern leg of the so-called triangle. In 1972, Hale Boggs agreed to help Nick Begich campaign for Begich's re-election to the House of Representatives. On the morning of October 16, 1972, Boggs, Begich, Begich's special assistant Russell Brown, and pilot Don Johns departed Anchorage in a Cessna C-310 aircraft for an estimated 3-hour, 30-minute flight to Juneau and a planned election rally. The weather forecast en route was marginal, with turbulence, low visibility, and icing conditions. Johns was an experienced pilot, but had a reputation as a risk-taker. Johns called the tower 10 minutes after takeoff, but neither he nor his passengers were ever heard from again. An hour after the Cessna C-310 failed to land in Juneau, an intensive search ensued and lasted 39 days. 400 aircraft searched for any sign of the downed plane, but nothing was found then nor since. Conspiracy theories swirled around the apparent deaths of Boggs and Begich. The most prominent of these suggested J. Edgar Hoover had a bomb placed on the plane to silence Boggs, who some suspected wanted to reopen the Kennedy assassination investigation. For proponents of the Alaska Triangle theory, this is the most famous case to support their beliefs. Alaska has some of the most intimidating terrain and geography on the planet. Huge mountains covered by glaciers, pockmarked with deep crevasses and canyons, descend into heavily forested slopes, and these in turn plunge into the North Pacific Ocean. Couple this daunting landscape with challenging weather conditions, and you can understand how and why small planes disappear in the 49th state. Planes started vanishing in Alaska as soon as humans began to fly them here. Sometimes hikers find wreckage from a downed plane decades after it disappeared, or a fisherman spots a seat cushion washed onto the shore, hinting to the final resting spot of the aircraft. Other times, though, as in the case of the Boggs-Begich flight, searchers never find a scrap of material or metal, and the fate of the plane and its occupants remains a mystery. While troubling, one can understand how a small airplane in Alaska could crash into thick brush, slam into a mountainside and end up covered by snow, fall into a deep crevasse, or plunge into the ocean. When a much larger plane disappears mid-flight in fair weather, the mystery deepens. At 11:15 a.m. Alaska Standard Time on January 26, 1950, a Douglas C-54D Skymaster, the military version of the Douglas DC-4, departed Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, headed for Great Falls, Montana. The plane held 36 passengers and 8 crewmen. The passengers included 2 military dependents, the pregnant wife of an Air Force Master Sergeant and her young son. But the rest of the passengers were military personnel. The flight from Anchorage to Great Falls was scheduled to take 8.5 hours. The pilot expected good weather with clear skies for most of the journey. The excellent visibility afforded the passengers a view of some of the most ruggedly beautiful scenery on the planet. The pilots reported their position to the various communication stations as they passed over them. After 2 hours, the Skymaster passed over the Alaska border and into the Yukon Territory of Canada. When the plane crossed over the Snag radio range, located near Beaver Creek, Yukon Territory, the pilot called the station and estimated the aircraft would reach the next reporting point at Aishihik in 20 minutes. His call sounded routine. He did not mention any problems with the plane, and the weather remained favorable. The Aishihik station heard no call from the C-54, and no other transmissions from the aircraft were received. When the C-54 failed to arrive in Great Falls, Montana, officials listed it as missing. An intensive search involving the U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, Canadian military, and civilian aircraft failed to find any clues about what happened to the Douglas C-54D Skymaster. A Canadian forest ranger reported seeing a low-flying plane on January 26th, traveling about 40 miles southwest of Snag. He said the airplane suddenly disappeared, and he heard a loud explosion, followed by columns of black smoke. Searchers found the sight incredible. but they found no evidence of a downed airplane in the area, the ranger indicated. Other reported sightings of the C-54 sent investigators in several different directions, but they found no remnant of the missing plane. Experts believe whatever happened to the Skymaster was both sudden and catastrophic, and structural failure, navigational error, or crew incapacitation must have caused the accident. Those who believe in the Alaska Triangle might suggest other reasons. The previous two aviation disappearances occurred decades ago, but even with better navigational equipment and emergency gear and transponders, planes in Alaska continue to vanish. One of the most recent tragic airplane disappearances in Alaska occurred on September 9, 2013. Alan Foster, a professional charter pilot with more than 9,000 hours of flight time, was flying his recently purchased PA-32 360 airplane from Atlanta to Anchorage. He was only 360 miles from home when he landed in Yakutat, Alaska to refuel. After he departed Yakutat, he called the Juneau Flight Service for a weather update, telling them he would stay in Cordova if it wasn't good enough to make it to Anchorage. 18 minutes later, radar showed a transponder target confirmed as Foster's plane at 1,100 feet. The aircraft was never seen again, and despite an extensive search, no one has ever sighted any sign of Foster or his plane. Let me pause for a minute so I can thank the folks at the puzzle game app Best Fiends. I appreciate you for sponsoring Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier. I have been playing Best Fiends for nearly a year now, and I love this game. I'm getting ready to take a short trip up to Anchorage. It takes less than 2 hours to fly there, but I know I will spend at least twice that amount of time sitting in airports. I'm not worried about boredom, though, because I will have my best fiends with me. I downloaded this game to my phone and can play it offline. It is the perfect answer to long plane trips, car rides, and sitting in waiting rooms. With its cute insect characters, its purple mushrooms, green leaves, red strawberries, blue raindrops, and yellow flowers, Best Fiends always lifts my mood. Its short, intense puzzles take my mind off the world around me and allow me to relax. Even a short Best Fiends break energizes me, and I encourage you to give it a try. Engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's Friends without the R. Best Fiends. No description of strange happenings in the Alaska Triangle would be complete without reports of UFO sightings. And one of the best documented UFO encounters ever recorded occurred in the airspace near Fairbanks on November 17, 1986. This sighting was significant because of who saw it and what they saw, and because military radar recorded the event. Japan Airlines JAL Flight 1628 was en route from Paris to Tokyo with a cargo of Beaujolais wine. The flight was scheduled to refuel in Reykjavik and in Anchorage. At 5:09 p.m. on November 17, 1986, JAL 1628, under the control of Captain Kenju Terauchi, was about 104 miles northeast of Fort Yukon. The flight controller asked the pilot to adjust his heading to fly south of Fort Yukon and Fairbanks. The co-pilot complied and turned the plane left about 15 degrees. Meanwhile, Captain Terauchi, seated on the cockpit's left side, saw bright lights shining through his window. The lights were to the left and below JAL 1628, and Terauchi assumed they were military plane. The captain ignored the lights until he realized they were keeping pace with his aircraft. Terauchi quickly contacted the Anchorage Center and asked if any other aircraft, either civilian or military, were in the vicinity of his plane. The Anchorage Center flight controller said there were no military aircraft in the area, and ground radar did not show any air traffic other than Flight 1628. At that moment, the lights began moving erratically. They suddenly appeared directly in front of the JAL plane, and Terauchi said the inside of the cockpit shined brightly, and he felt the warmth of the UFO's thrusters on his face. Terauchi said he and his crew were not immediately frightened, but instead watched in amazement as the lights pulsed and kept pace with the jumbo jet. When Terauchi reported the strange lights, the Anchorage Center controller said he saw nothing on his radar. The plane's radar, though, showed a large green round object 7 to 8 miles away. When the cargo plane arrived above Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks, it was a clear night, and the bright city lights lit up the sky. Terauchi looked out his window and saw the silhouette of a gigantic spaceship following their plane. He later said the UFO was twice the size of an aircraft carrier. He could only guess this was the mothership of the smaller UFOs the plane had previously encountered. The massive, unidentified aircraft struck fear in Terauchi, and he attempted evasive maneuvers to avoid it. The UFO mirrored his every move. The Anchorage Center controller offered to scramble a military jet, but Terauchi declined, fearing the enormous spaceship would consider such an action confrontational. When a United Airlines passenger jet flew into the area near the JAL cargo plane, the air traffic controller asked the United flight crew to get a visual of the situation. Terauchi said that as soon as the United Airlines plane arrived, the UFO disappeared, and he did not see it again.
1 week after the JAL 1628 incident, John Callahan, the FAA Division Chief of Accidents and Investigations in Washington, D.C., received a call from a flight control supervisor in Anchorage. The Anchorage flight controller told Callahan that the Anchorage FAA office was full of media and asked him what they should do. Callahan asked, "What happened?" And the Anchorage official replied, "It's the UFO." Callahan said, "What UFO?" The Anchorage official explained that a week earlier, a UFO chased a 747 across Alaska skies for approximately 30 minutes. Callahan told his Anchorage associate to get the data together and immediately ship it to him in Washington, D.C. Callahan said he wanted everything, including the radar recordings and the recordings between the controller on the ground and Captain Terauchi. Callahan also contacted the military, but the Air Force refused to send their tapes. When Callahan received the tapes, he listened to the three-way conversation between Anchorage Air Traffic Control, ATC, Elmendorf Air Force Base's NORAD Regional Operations Control Center, and Captain Terauchi on JAL 1628. He also played the tape of the ATC radar sightings. Callahan noted there was no sign of the UFOs on the ATC radar. Still, from listening to the conversation, it was clear those at Elmendorf with their more sophisticated radar saw the UFOs and were tracking their maneuvers. The military controller noted the UFOs were traveling at thousands of miles per hour as they swirled around the 747. One of the most surprising findings Callahan discovered was near the end of the incident, when the United Airlines flight arrived. At that moment, Captain Terauchi no longer saw the giant UFO, and the United pilot never saw the craft. Military radar, though, clearly showed the UFO,
and it had tucked in behind the United flight and began following it. No one at Ellendorf's NORAD Regional Operations Control Center notified the United crew to inform them a giant, unidentified aircraft was following them. Callahan's boss told him not to tell anyone about the UFO incident until they could meet with the intelligence and security personnel. The following day, his boss set up a briefing. The meeting included 3 FBI agents, 3 CIA agents, and Ronald Reagan's scientific study team. Callahan and his staff presented everything they had and answered questions. When the meeting concluded, one of the CIA agents swore the participants to secrecy and told them this meeting never happened. The agents admitted the UFOs were not stealth bombers then in development or any other military aircraft type. The CIA agents told Callahan they could not release this information to the American public because it would cause a panic. The CIA confiscated all the original voice recordings and radar tapes connected to the UFO incident. But they did not know Callahan had copies of everything at his office. Callahan said he believed Captain Terauchi saw 3 UFOs, and Reagan's scientific team agreed with him. They said this was the only time a UFO was recorded on radar for such an extended period. Commercial airline pilots again reported UFO sightings in Alaska skies in January 1987, little more than 2 months after Captain Terauchi claimed he and his crew saw 3 UFOs. On January 29, 1987, the crew of Alaska Airlines Flight 53 sighted a fast-moving object on their onboard weather radar. The plane was flying at 35,000 feet, or 11,000 meters, and was approximately 60 miles, or 97 kilometers, west of McGrath, on a flight from Nome to Anchorage. The crew calculated the UFO was moving at a speed of 18,000 miles per hour, or 29,000 kilometers per hour, as it sped away from them. On January 30, 1987, a U.S. Air Force KC-135 jet traveling from Anchorage to Fairbanks sighted a huge UFO. Still, other than the recording of the conversation between the Air Force crew and Anchorage Center, little was relayed about this sighting. Over the years, individuals have reported countless other UFOs in the skies over Alaska, but none as well documented as the sighting by the crew of JAL 1628. Since 1998, there have been more than 560 UFO sightings reported in Alaska. Hundreds of people have wandered into the Alaska wilderness and were never seen again. Some of these individuals come to Alaska unprepared for the harsh climate, rugged landscape, and wild animals. But even experienced outdoorsmen, mountain climbers, and boaters disappear here. Richard Lyman Griffiths from Spokane, Washington, invented a wilderness survival cocoon. And in the summer of 2006, he headed into the wilderness of southeast Alaska to test his invention. No one reported him missing for a year. When authorities began searching for him, they learned a bus dropped off Griffiths along the Alaska Highway. He stopped at a lodge near the White River, where he left some of his gear, and told people he planned to hike upriver to McCarthy, a small town in the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park. He was never seen again. Since Griffiths told friends he might spend the winter in Alaska, no one worried about him for several months. But finally, a friend called the Canadian Mounties and reported him missing. His friend had no idea where Griffiths was planning to go to test his wilderness cocoon. No trace has ever been found of Griffiths or his bright orange cocoon.
Mountain climbing is a dangerous pursuit. In addition to Mount Denali, the highest peak in North America, Alaska boasts many of the most challenging mountains and glaciers any daring alpinist could hope to conquer. Mountain climbers die every year in Alaska, but most climbers ascend in groups. If one or two members of the group tragically fall into a crevasse, their companions can tell the story about what happened to them. When a solo climber makes a fatal mistake, no one is there to record the details, and experts can only guess what happened. In 1984, Naomi Yumira, a famous Japanese adventurer and mountain climber, attempted a solo winter ascent of Denali. Yumira had already successfully summited Denali on his own, but he wanted to try a more challenging climb in the winter. He made it to the top on February 13, 1984, but something happened on his descent, and he never returned to base camp. Conditions near the top of Denali when Yumira disappeared included high winds and a temperature of minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or minus 46 degrees Celsius. Such brutal conditions leave little room for human error. More recently, on March 7, 2018, two experienced climbers, Ryan Johnson and Marc-Andre Leclerc, failed to return from a climb on a 7-peaked mountain near Juneau. In this instance, though, searchers found a clue hinting at the fate of the two men. They found an intact anchor rope at the top of an ice chute on one peak, and then saw two climbing ropes in a crevasse midway down the same peak. A spokesperson for the Alaska State Troopers said the evidence showed the climbers made it to the top and set an anchor. Then, she said, they were either taken out by an avalanche, a rope failed, or something else catastrophic occurred. There's no question more people, planes, and boats disappear in Alaska than anywhere else in the United States. Is something strange happening here? Or is this just a dangerous place with huge mountains, treacherous glaciers, roaring rivers, and violent storms? The Tlingit Native people, indigenous to southeastern Alaska, tell stories about a mythical, shape-shifting demon named Kushtaka. Kushtaka roughly translates to land otter man. According to legend, this creature appears to travelers in an irresistible form, such as a child screaming for help. Kushtaka lures his victims to a river, where he either tears them to shreds or turns them into another Kushtaka. Stories of a Bigfoot-like creature or a monster called Hairy Man also abound in small villages throughout Alaska. In the 1930s and 1940s, after several villagers from Portlock, Alaska, on the Kenai Peninsula, disappeared under mysterious circumstances, town folks became convinced a giant, man-like creature was preying on the residents. The remaining villagers packed their gear and left the area. The houses of the ghost town of Portlock remain. One wild theory that attempts to explain the mysteries of the Alaska Triangle claims a giant black pyramid twice the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza lays buried near Mount Denali. It is the energy from this pyramid that causes people, planes, and boats to disappear. Another theory claims the Alaska Triangle lies on vile vortices, causing the area to have powerful electromagnetic anomalies and negative energy vortexes. To explain vile vortices to you, I'll turn this over to Marianne Paul, who has the podcast Real Ghost Chatter. Take it away, Marianne, and explain this phenomenon to us.
Hello, Robin, and thanks for having me on your show. Since you are sharing stories of disappearances in the Alaska Triangle, a type of vile vortex, I want to share what I've found out about these anomalies. So, what is a vile vortex? You've heard the chilling stories about the Bermuda Triangle, right? Well, there are several other mysterious places where ships and planes just seem to vanish. These 12 places are collectively called the Vile Vortices, and like their more famous sibling, the Bermuda Triangle, they all hold some rather creepy secrets. Today I can only share a few. First, some background. To this day, scientists are not exactly sure how these vile vortices work and why they happen. What we do know is that they are areas in which strange, possibly even paranormal phenomena, disappearances, and disturbing tales seem to be commonplace. The Bermuda Triangle most likely being the most famous of these vortices. The vile vortices are 12 equidistant vertex points on a planetary grid. Ivan T. Sanderson, a naturalist and paranormal investigator, originally plotted these anomalies. Sanderson first coined the term vile vortices in his article, The 12 Devil's Graveyards Around the World, published in Saga magazine in 1972. Sanderson is the founder of the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained and was avidly interested in investigating ship and plane disappearances linked to the paranormal. So in the late 60s, he focused his attention on 10 areas that were approximately equidistant and were the subjects of reported unexplained incidents and/or electromagnetic distortions. 10 of the vile vortices are located in the Earth's tropical climates. 5 of them fall within the Tropic of Cancer and the other 5 within the Tropic of Capricorn. The remaining 2 vile vortices are located at the North and South poles. Together, the vile vortices form the vertices of an icosahedron, which is a 20-phased polyhedron. Sanderson theorized that hot and cold air and sea currents crossing these saucer-shaped areas might create the electromagnetic anomalies responsible for the disappearance of planes and the seagoing vessels and the reported mechanical and instrument malfunctions in these areas. Interestingly enough, half of the vortices reside above the equator and half below it. They are also evenly spread out on the Earth, which investigators suggest prove there is something logical and mathematical to this seeming chaos. Here's a list of the vile vortices: the Bermuda Triangle, the Algerian megaliths, the city of Mohenjo-Daro, the Hamakulia volcano east of Hawaii, the Dragon's Triangle in the Devil's Sea, the South Atlantic Anomaly, the Wharton Basin, the Easter Island megaliths, east of Rio de Janeiro, the Loyalty Islands, the North Pole, and the South Pole. Today, I'd like to share about the 3 best known of these vile vortices: the Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle, and the South Atlantic Anomaly. Just so you know, though, all 12 geographic areas have reported instances of magnetic anomalies and other unexplained phenomena. The Bermuda Triangle has a long and sordid history. Whole fleets of torpedo bombers, spy planes, Navy ships, the infamous Mary Celeste, and others have all come to a mysterious calamity in this ocean area near the tip of Florida. Glowing water, spinning compasses, random malfunctions, and strange sightings while passing through are reported by the lucky ones who weren't lost there. The other thing we know for sure is that people are dying there. In the last 100 years, over 1,000 people have lost their lives to the Bermuda Triangle. Whether or not you believe something paranormal is happening, you must admit that those are some pretty scary numbers. The South Atlantic Anomaly is particularly interesting because NASA has extensively studied this area itself. An inner and outer radiation belt surrounds the Earth. In the South Atlantic, the inner radiation belt comes closest to the Earth's surface than anywhere else, creating an area where the Earth's magnetic field is weaker and there's a flux of energetic particles. Many times, satellites who go through this belt experience malfunctions and glitches, and astronauts see strange shooting star-like lights. This place also causes severe problems for aircraft. Planes disappear mysteriously here, which probably have something to do with the navigational and electronic malfunctions. The Dragon's Triangle is located in the sea the Japanese call Mono Umi, which loosely translated is the Sea of the Devil. Often compared to the Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle is an area where seagoing vessels and aircraft allegedly mysteriously disappear. Besides vanishing planes and ships, phenomena linked to the Dragon's Triangle include ghost ships, UFOs, lapses in time, and electronic equipment malfunctions. Some writers, including Charles Berlitz, even linked the Dragon's Triangle to the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. In the USA are the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, and the Alaska Triangle is, well, in Alaska. Although not an official via Vortex, the inland Bridgewater Triangle is likely one of the world's most concentrated areas of various paranormal reports. Located just 30 miles south of Boston, this 200 square mile area has the Massachusetts towns of Abington, Freetown, and Rehoboth at its angles. Located nearly dead center within the triangle is the town of Bridgewater, and the area also encompasses 6 other Massachusetts towns: Raynham, Taunton, Brockton, Mansfield, Norton, and Easton. Aside from the number and diversity of paranormal reports, what is phenomenal about the Bridgewater Triangle is that the first report of paranormal activity was made almost 3 centuries ago in 1760. At 10 a.m. on May 10th, 1760, a sphere of light was reported to hover over New England and emit light so brightly it cast shadows in the morning sun. Reportedly, people saw the light in both Bridgewater and Roxbury. Since then, the area has spawned a diversity of reports that include paranormal events ranging from ghost dancers to UFOs to cryptozoological sightings. To learn about the Alaska Triangle, join Robin on my podcast, Real Ghost Chatter, which is on anchor.fm. There, Robin will be sharing about the Alaska Triangle Vortex in conjunction with a story about a strange disappearance. I don't know that you'd like to miss that one because Robin's stories are always good. Thank you for having me on, Robin.
Thank you, Marianne, for your explanation. And please hop over to Real Ghost Chatter, where I am Mary Ann's guest today. I have one more incredible story of mysterious disappearing airplanes to tell, and Marianne talks more about vile vortices. I like the idea of positive and negative energy vortexes, and maybe the theory is correct. My logical mind, though, would like more proof before I embrace this phenomenon. Alaska is mostly wilderness, and natural elements are linked to the majority of the mysterious disappearances here. Alaska has 33,000 miles of coastline and more than 3 million lakes. Hikers and mountain climbers can fall into deep crevasses. Also, an airplane might slam into a mountain, sparking an avalanche that covers the wreckage with snow in a matter of moments and leaves no trace of the aircraft's final resting spot. Accidental injuries occur at twice the national rate in Alaska and are the 3rd leading cause of death. People wander into the wilderness unprepared for what to expect, and authorities rescue hundreds of individuals every year. Still, most hikers survive their wilderness adventures in the Alaska Triangle without suffering even a scratch, and most planes and boats in the area reach their destinations without issue. Alaska is beautiful and safe. Until it isn't. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support it, I invite you to join the Last Frontier Club. Club members can unlock extra episodes, follow news on current murder investigations or court cases in Alaska, receive deals on murder and mystery in the Last Frontier merchandise, and more. To learn about the Last Frontier Club, please check the show notes for the link. I will be back soon with the next episode of Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier.